Landlord is jealous of my income, raises my rent $500. I screw him years later for $20,000. Posted by Rocky Moose. In the late 90s, wife and I were just married, just getting started, and we decided to dink, double income, no kids, for a few years to save up for a down payment on a house. The dot-com bubble was still rising, and I was a newly minted software developer. I had an entry-level job for a while, and then got recruited to a new city and a new job that paid 3 times what I was making before. It was an offer too good to pass up. I ran the numbers, and it was a no-brainer. By living frugally and saving my entire salary, living off just her income, we would easily have enough in a year to put 20% down payment on a new house. We rented an apartment in the new city that was listed for $950 a month. The landlord was a real estate agent who owned a 2-bedroom condo as an investment property. Let's call him Hank Wazowski. Hank was a thin, gray, no-nonsense guy. He was pleasant enough, but perfunctory, dry, and had no sense of humor. He made a point of explaining that under no circumstances was he responsible for maintaining the garbage disposal and that it was not included in the rental agreement, and he would not be responsible for fixing it were it to break. Okay. He seemed slightly amused by us, a clueless young newlywed couple, but I could tell he wanted to rent to us because we were very obviously a safe choice as renters. We filled out the rental agreement and the credit check, and this is where my troubles began. Hank looked hard at the credit application where I listed my job title, software developer, and my income, $75,000. For a 23-year-old in his second year out of college in the late 1990s, this is a small fortune. Throw in my wife's salary, and we were over 6 figures in income renting an apartment far beneath our means. Like I said, dink is the way to go when starting out. I can't believe how much money you make, Hank must have said a half a dozen times, muttering under his breath. I explained we were saving to buy a house and that we were only going to stay in the apartment a year. We might stay a few months after the term is over. Would month to month be okay after a year? Hank assured us that would be fine. We saw Hank only once during the year, and he again mentioned my salary and how he couldn't believe that's what software developers were making. It was awkward, and I gave a vague reply. Anyway, a year later, we had found a house to buy, signed all the papers, and were making plans to move. The new house wasn't going to be ready until 2 months after our rental lease was up, so I called Hank to ask if we could, as discussed, simply extend the lease by 2 months before moving out. Hank assured me on the phone it would be no problem, and he would send over an extension for us to sign. The extension arrived in the mail, and it included a month-to-month clause and a $500 increase in the rent. I flipped out and called him. Hank, why are you increasing the rent over 50%? That's too much. That's more than my new mortgage is going to be. He was super condescending to me. Rocky Moose, it's what the apartment goes for now. I would be losing money by renting it for less. I tried to reason with him, but it was very clear he knew we could afford the $500, had no choice in the matter, and he was going to screw us over as best he could. He got angry with me for arguing my point, and I'll never forget his parting words. You don't have to like it, Rocky Moose. You just have to pay it. My wife and I tried to figure out a way to move out early by putting our furniture in storage for a couple months and crashing with friends, but it just wasn't going to work out. I swallowed my pride and wrote out the check for $1,450 for the extra month. A month later, I wrote a similar check, and then we moved out. I made sure the apartment was spotless before moving, but Hank still withheld $300 from our security deposit for BS things that were just a way for him to squeeze a few more dollars from the kids who made too much money. $100 for cleaning, sure, but $300 was obscene. In my mind, he had screwed me over for $1,200 and there was nothing I could do about it. What made it even more infuriating is that I saw the ad that Hank put in the paper after we moved out, and he listed the apartment for rent at only $150 more than we'd been paying originally, not the grossly inflated $500 increase, and it didn't rent. A month later, I saw the same ad and he had lowered the price to $75 more than we'd been paying, and I assume it got rented since the ads stopped appearing. Fast forward about 5 years. Life is good, the house is good, we have a baby, and even though the dot-com bubble has burst, I'm still employed. One day, out of the blue, I overhear one of my coworkers, Phil, a senior developer, talking to the guy working the reception desk. "Hey Mike, I'm expecting someone to drop off some paperwork for me. If a Hank Wazowski asks for me, tell him I'll be right out." I freeze and get a taste of bile in my mouth, remembering how I had to write out that name on those checks all those years ago. There's no way it's the same guy, right? I walk over to Phil, who was still by the reception desk. "Hey Phil," I say, "how do you know that name, Hank Wazowski?" Phil explains that Hank is his real estate agent. "I bought my condo through him several years ago. I'm selling my condo now so I can buy a house, so I'm going to ask him to be my agent again. Do you know him?" I tell Phil that I used to rent an apartment from Hank and describe what he looks like. Phil confirms the description. It's the same guy. Wow, small world, right? And on cue, right then, the front door to the office opens and in walks Hank Wazowski. I stare in disbelief. He's carrying a folder of papers and doesn't recognize me. Phil and Hank shake hands and they talk for a few moments. I stand there, silently, wondering what to do. Phil finally says, "Hank, this is my friend Rocky Moose. I think you may have already met." "Yes, hello Hank. Good to see you again. My wife and I were your tenants a few years ago on Main Street. Remember, the software developer who rented for a year saving to buy a house? Well, this is where I work. Here, with Phil." Hank's eyes indicate he now remembers me and he's starting to put it all together. We shake hands and he says, yes, of course he remembers, and asks how we're doing. "Oh, we're just fine, thanks for asking. Phil says you're his real estate agent. Small world, isn't it?" Hank nods pleasantly. He still doesn't remember the details of our last conversation. I do some quick math in my head. This is the early to mid-2000s. The real estate market is very strong and easy money for any agent. The crash of 2008 is still a few years in the future. I start to think out loud. Let's see, selling the condo for around $150,000 to $200,000, and you're looking at houses in the $500,000 range, so that's $650,000 to $700,000 in total transactions. An agent getting 3% on the sale and the purchase is getting around $20,000 for his trouble. That's good commission for the agent, isn't it? Hank's eyes flash, and I can tell he remembers everything about me now. Phil is surprised at my passive-aggressive tone, and I am enjoying the uncomfortable silence. Hank deflects my question, saying it's complicated, and tells Phil to send back the papers as soon as possible. He shakes hands with Phil, looks at me, nods, and goes to leave. "It was really good to see you again, Hank," I call behind him. He exits the building. As the door is still shutting, I say a bit too loudly so that Hank can hear. Hey Phil, don't sign anything just yet. I have a story to tell you." Phil looks at me and says, "Rocky, what the heck was all that about?" He looks PO'd and confused at my behavior. I tell Phil the whole story, the rent, the $500 increase, the security deposit, the "you don't have to like it, you just have to pay it," everything. "Phil, you can't use this guy to sell your condo and buy a house. I hate him. He is evil. I'll help you find another real estate agent. Just use anyone but Hank." So the great thing about Phil is that, well, he's a great guy. He says he's a little surprised at my story and has always known Hank as a straightforward guy. "But I totally see him doing that to you," he admits. "There's no way I could use him now. What a jerk." Then Phil's eyes lit up a bit. "What do you want me to say when I fire him?" I have special feelings for Phil now. We came up with a plan, and I made sure there were some key phrases in Phil's repertoire. We planned it all out together in advance. My only regret is that I didn't get to see Hank's reaction in person a day later when Phil made the following phone call while I stood behind him listening. "Hi Hank, it's Phil calling. Yeah, about that. I've decided to get some other quotes from other agents. I'm not going to sign up with you." Pause. No, you shouldn't give a discount. You'd be losing money if you did that." Another pause. "No, this is just a decision I've made. No, it has nothing to do with Rocky Moose." Pause. "Well, you don't have to like it, Hank. You just have to accept it. Goodbye." Click. And it was the greatest revenge I could have ever imagined. Through a chance meeting years later, Hank got screwed out of $20,000 in easy commissions. And the best part is, Hank absolutely knew it had everything to do with Rocky Moose. Oh man, the best thing about these pro-revenges is when the good guy gets to take the bad guy's quote, put his foot down, flip it in reverse, it right back in his face. Love it. 10 out of 10 OP. Well done. While we're on the subject of homeowners associations, here's a story of how my parents' HOA tried to use a 40-year-old rule to stop them from repairing hurricane damage and got the shaft for their trouble. Posted by Seth Cassis. A few months back, as you all may remember, Florida got pretty beaten up by a couple of hurricanes. My folks lived down there, and while none of the damage that they sustained was life-alteringly horrible or home-destroying, homeowners insurance kicked in and they had some water damage through the roof. They also needed a new one because of all the shingles that had come off and debris that had punctured it. My folks looked through roofing options and determined that a metal roof would be a great option to reduce damage and maintenance on their home. Plus, it would serve as a more energy-efficient option with passive solar collection and fewer thermal losses in the summer and winter. It's more expensive, but my dad was basically r/personal finance incarnate while I was growing up. He's in his 60s and has finally concluded that he has FU money so long as that community is concerned, so the roof was a good investment. It looked like a win-win-win with that roof. Then they reviewed the HOA and saw that, as of 1989, metal roofs are prohibited in the neighborhood, subject to fines and mandatory removal. Reviewing the bylaw further showed that it was clearly referring to older, crappier tin roofs, not a proper metal one like today's market provides, which looks great and has all of those other benefits. My folks wanted to play by the rules though, and called up the HOA to explain the situation. HOA was friendly and said that they would be looking into that bylaw and that my folks weren't the only ones who requested that they be allowed to have a metal roof. My parents couldn't get a roofing contractor in for a few months anyway. There was too much demand since everyone else's roof got wrecked, so they waited a few weeks and got nothing new out of the HOA. Tried again a few weeks later. Nothing. After 2 months of this, they said screw it and started construction on the metal roof. Popular opinion in the neighborhood was on their side, and the roof was covered with a tarp that wouldn't last forever. The new roof got installed over the course of a few days, and then we found out the HOA's crappiness. The neighborhood has a nice brick sign out front that says, "Welcome to Austinville." It's very classy, very nice, and was very damaged in a hurricane. The HOA was strapped for money due to other repairs and dues, and some prick had the bright idea to impose as many fines as they could on the neighborhood to pay for these repairs. Starting with my folks. They served my folks with a letter claiming that they were in violation of the HOA and demanded a $25,000 fine and that they remove it, which is, of course, absurd. My poor mother is very much a play-by-the-rules sort, and she was worried sick. Dad's ex-Navy and a contract negotiator. He essentially checked his 60-year-old knuckles and said, "Oh, you little craps want to play, do you?" So they set about researching and making some calls. Poor mom kept waking up at 1 a.m., unable to sleep, and I felt terrible for her as she went through this. But then they had a breakthrough. A few weeks after being served, and I'm fuzzy on the timeline since I don't live in Florida, it may have been less, there was essentially a burn them at the stake meeting of the HOA where my parents could defend themselves for an absurdly short amount of time, and the HOA could rip into them for daring to defy their wrath. So my mom, because she's more social and has a better temper than Dad, comes up to speak and lets the HOA know that they can't do this. HOA smirks and says that they sure can. They have a 40-year-old statute saying they can. Mom says, "You do, but I have state law on my side, which supersedes your statute." Turns out, there's a law in Florida stating that an HOA, or really any regulation, cannot be used to prevent an eco-friendly improvement from taking place on anyone's private property. And wouldn't you know it, the passive solar of the metal roof counts as an eco-friendly improvement. Turns out, the roofing contractors have dealt with similar stuff before. When Dad mentioned what was going on to them, the contracting officer pulled out a few letters of accreditation and a few past cases where the court had determined that their product was eco-friendly and forced the HOA to pay all legal fees. My mom produced all of this for the crappy HOA, who had to admit that this was, in fact, ironclad. Strapped for money as they were, they couldn't afford to pay a lawyer. HOA head growls, "Is that all?" Mom turns up the sweetness to 11. "No, I see in the bylaws that we can vote to impeach board members at any HOA meeting and to elect their replacements. I move to impeach, well, all of you. I nominate my husband and," she rattles off a list of names. HOA is stunned. While Dad looked into the legal, Mom looked into the new neighborhood. Popular opinion was on their side, and the hearing was public for the neighborhood. Mom convinced a majority of the homeowners to attend and remove the board for their crappy policy. With that, my parents are now on the all-new board, and Dad is putting his contract negotiation skills and his own craftsmanship skills to work, repairing the front entrance. And metal roofs are now allowed by the all-new HOA. I'll tell you what, man, this is this is nuclear, this is malicious compliance. I love how they did the research and the crummy organization tries to just cover it all up, pretend it doesn't exist, then it gets slapped right back in their face. Way to go, OP, and your parents. Be sure to comment the secret phrase below, "Eye of the Tiger," because it's a Rocky story, even though I haven't seen any of the movies. My name's Austin, check out another video here, and I'll see you there.